My name's Jill Aebi-Mytton, and I'm one of 3 researchers at the University of Salford running a large study there, which I talked a bit about yesterday. This is a difficult presentation to give. I don't know how I'm going to be as I give it, so we'll see how it goes. But I am looking at child sexual abuse, and these are very preliminary topics, preliminary findings from our research, really. But I'm going to start with a poem, and I'm not going to read it out, nor is the author. We want you to read it yourselves, just because it's a difficult one. So this was written by my newly adopted daughter, who's sitting at the front here, Cheryl. I'm having to crack jokes because this is kind of difficult. So if you don't mind just reading that, please. This is not the entire poem. We couldn't get it all onto one slide. What I have done, I have 5 copies here, but you're welcome to look at, of the entirety of this poem and a few others written by others. And also, if you want the slides, there's a notebook there that you can put your name and email address. You have the slides. I can send you an electronic version of the poems as well if you'd like them. In spite of all that Cheryl went through, as evidenced in this poem, she and many others have been creating what are called Get a Life podcasts, which they spoke about a couple of days ago, giving voice to many former members of the Brethren. And I know that other groups had done the same. And I think it's very important to get the voices out there, because today I'm touching on things that should never happen to a child. Never. And yet they do. And I have no doubt that in this room today, there are people who have had that experience. And some of you will also have completed our research. And for that, I thank you. Child sexual abuse is sadly not new. Oh, sorry, I forgot about that slide. I hate overviews, but there it is for somebody that wants to know my precious mountains that I run to at any moment I can. Child abuse is not new, and over again we get news articles like these appearing on our screens, on our televisions, in our in trays. The news is full of stories of abuse. And quite often they're from people, by people that we thought we could trust. Celebrities, schools, even famous ones like the Yehudi Menuhin School, bishops, archbishops, police, social workers, parliamentarians, and so on. It's endemic. We find it in mainstream churches, Church of England, Roman Catholic Church, some Jewish groups, and of course many incidences reported in cultic groups. It's quite a serious problem. Now, over the years, various royal commissions and investigations have been created and published. I've mentioned 3 of them, the one in Australia, these are all recent, the one in New Zealand, and the independent inquiry in the UK, with England and Wales. These reports are published, recommendations are made, and then nothing happens. Nothing changes. Abuse survivor still failed years after inquiry. And this was the chair of the independent inquiry in the UK. So they're being ignored in some level. But to be fair, and I'm always trying to be fair, one of the struggles that royal commissions and researchers have is they come up against this issue of definition. What is child abuse? Without a clear single definition, how can we even think about prevalence or psychological sequelae and so on? This paper by Matthews and Colin Vizina kind of rescued me a little bit from the quagmire I found myself in as I read articles about child sexual abuse. I say they rescued me a little bit. They didn't, but they gave me a structure to think about it. Because they've looked through research studies, policy documents, the legal profession, all using different definitions. And questions have arisen. Does child sexual abuse have to be inflicted by an adult? What is a child? What are the social norms in a particular country? Is that relevant? Child marriage is accepted in some, isn't it? And so we have these problems of being unable to compare across studies because of this difficulty with the definitions. This is what they came up with. They came up with 3 dimensions on which the definitions of child sexual abuse vary. I don't have the time to go through this in detail, but I recommend you read the article. So there's the use of the child's age, for example. It's either not stipulated or it varies. Is a child someone under 18, under 17, under 16? What about the relationship with the child and the abuser? In some cases, some definitions say it's any adult or any child. Others say it could be child on child. Others say the perpetrator has to be at least 5 years older. You'll see in a minute why that just does not work. The use of the element of sexual gratification, does that need to be there? Do we need to state that the perpetrator does it for purposes of sexual gratification? But across these 3 organizations, if you like, these 3 domains, they vary. The second dimension was about the acts that constitute child sexual abuse. So some have a long list of 12, others only have 4. We haven't in the middle because we have 8. Do the acts have to be about contact with a child? Or can it be non-contact, like making the child watch porn, for example? The third dimension is the whole issue of consent. Does that need to be in the definition? And if so, how do we define it? We're talking about children, not adults. I'd love to go in more into that, but I simply don't have the time. But the definition that I kind of am leaning towards at the moment is this one by the WHO. The involvement of any child in sexual activity that he or she does not fully comprehend, is unable to give, therefore, informed consent to, or for which the child is not developmentally prepared and cannot, therefore, give consent. Or that violates the laws or social taboos of society, which takes it out away from the child. But I have a slight issue with that one. I know Stu was kind of moving in there. I'm not so happy with that, because I think that is open to interpretation. But this is an important bit. Child sexual abuse is evidenced by this activity between a child and an adult, or another child who by age or development is in a relationship of responsibility, trust, or power. And that's important for our research. You'll see why in a moment. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of a Child defines a child as being under 18. Unfortunately, I didn't see that before we created the questionnaire. But so we said under 16, but I think actually most people ignored it. If we turn to prevalence, so I can't solve the problem of definition, I'm afraid. It's difficult to establish because of the definitional differences that I've mentioned, because of the different ways that it's assessed across the studies. So some studies do it by interview, some do it by self-administered questionnaires, or maybe a mixture of both. There is a lack of data about the characteristics of CSA. What is it? How old do the perpetrators need to be? And so on. Official records provide us with incidence rates, but they are based only on reported cases and therefore are not going to give the full picture. And quite often they're over a restricted time frame, for example, a year. And prevalence rates are largely derived from retrospective self-reported accounts, which are not necessarily problematic, but they can be. Actually, I need to do a whole session just on this, don't I? It is a very confusing picture. But I found 3 meta-analyses, and there you can see the ranges. They're just kind of all over the place, aren't they? I'm going to focus just on Stoltenberg et al. Their meta-analysis, they reviewed 331 studies published between 1980 and 2008. That combined gave them 1 million participants. Yeah, wow, did. So I don't know how they came up with 8% for males and 18% for females. I need to kind of dig a bit deeper into the paper. But it does at least give us a little bit of a starting point for comparison. So, but the problem is that we've done this study on child sexual abuse. We've got percentage of people who are reporting it. Without knowing what the prevalence is in the general population, how can we compare? Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse wrote this, and I'm going to ask you to read it because my throat is giving out. Or perhaps I should read it. It's difficult to imagine what it feels like to be silenced or dismissed when trying to tell somebody you've been sexually abused. This happens so often to victims and survivors that many gave up trying to report what had happened to them. And that is why the Truth Project, designed to enable victims and survivors to share their accounts in a confidential setting, was such a vital part of the inquiry's work, and why victims and survivors' voices represents a cornerstone of the inquiry's analysis and recommendations. Nearly 6,200 victims and survivors contributed to the Truth Project, and for some, it was the first time they had spoken about the child sexual abuse they had suffered. And that links kind of quite nicely with the podcasts that are going out, the Get a Life podcast, podcasts by other former members, because you're all giving a voice to the survivors. You can get the copy of the slides afterwards, so don't think you've got to write them down. They went on to say, the red bit there, what marks religious organizations out from other institutions is the explicit purpose they have in teaching right from wrong. The moral turpitude of any failing by them in the prevention of or response to child sexual abuse is therefore heightened. And then this final bit, freedom of religion and belief can never justify or excuse the ill treatment of a child or a failure to take adequate steps to protect them from harm. The other thing that IICSA, which is actually pronounced ICSA, so it's a bit confusing, is they looked at the barriers to reporting, and there's a list of them. And they're fairly obvious ones, really. Victim blaming, the whole shame and honor thing, a lack of discussion of sex and sexuality within cultic groups, the abuse of power by religious leaders, which, of course, because they're mostly men, you get this gender disparity. The mistrust of external agencies is a very important one, I think. It's kind of fostered by the leaders of the cultic group because they know that external agencies have the power to expose them. The whole issue of forgiveness is another big one. You know, the child does report the sexual abuse. The elders or whoever speak to the perpetrator sobs and says, I'm really sorry. So then they have to forgive them, and it's not reported to the authorities. Fear of being disbelieved, that's very common, I think, in child sexual abuse. And the fear of being excluded and ostracized by their communities. And that, again, for a cultic group is very pertinent because you are at risk of losing all your family and friends and everything that you've ever known. And of course, because children are not reporting it, and because the organizations are not reporting it, the prosecution rates are very low. So very few child sexual abuse cases actually get to court. With regards to safeguarding policies, this study also reported that in the UK, there is no legal obligation for religious organizations to follow the guidance of the child protection policies. However, just before this conference, there is currently a bill, I think, going through the Houses of Parliament, and I came across a speech by Sam Carling, the Labour MP for Northwest Cambridgeshire. He happens to be also an XJW, so it's really close to his heart. And I'm going to contact him when I get back, because he's quite clearly wanting amendments to the Act to make sure that when it does go through, if and when it does go through, it actually really does safeguard the children in these groups. So let's have a look to see what we found. But unfortunately, I have to give a disclaimer to start with. Back into 2014, I did a similar study looking just at former members of the Brethren. 27% of the sample reported child sexual abuse. And I made it clear then, and I'm reading this, I make it clear now that I did not and would not extrapolate from that sample to all former members of the Brethren, nor would I ever extrapolate and generalize to the current members of the Brethren. Unfortunately, attempts were made by the Brethren lawyers to state that I did make those claims, which I regard as defamatory, because I'm a professional researcher. I don't make wild claims like that. Design and methodology, you've probably seen this slide before, either last year or the year before, or even yesterday. But the important one here is this child sexual victimization questionnaire, which is part of the package. Well, we've got 5 clinical measures of distress and 5 measures of group experience. And I can see that Google Docs has messed up with the formatting there, but never mind. Criteria for the participants over the age of 18, they're fairly kind of self-evident. We do actually have a control group, but unfortunately we don't have enough people in it yet. So that's our next goal, so that we can at least have a comparison group. Interestingly, they came from 62 different countries, and they've been in 150 different groups. So as you can imagine, some of the cell sizes for each group are too small for us to actually do much with at the moment. So if you haven't done the research yet, please do it. Please put your name and address there and I can send you the link. We ended up, well, at the moment, we've got 1,162 participants. Now, to explore all of this, because first of all, the overall percent of people out of that 1,162, the percentage was 54.3% have reported child sexual abuse. Now, it doesn't matter which rate you took from that meta-analysis I showed you, that is above it. However, who were the perpetrators? Were they members of the group? Or were they strangers? Or were they teachers, doctors? Who? So we started filtering the cases down. We started out with 1,162. Of those, 631 report child sexual abuse. We then asked, was the perpetrator a member of the group? And 379 said yes. So now we've got 32.5%. It's not that I'm disregarding the others, it's just that we're interested specifically in people who have been abused by a member of the group, okay? But then for some reason, we found 19 people who are actually claiming to be first-generation adults. Now, either that's not true, and maybe they're teenagers who joined independently, perhaps. So that's something we need to drill down into to find out who those 19 people are that have said they're first-generation adults, because they could be both. If they joined in their teenage years independently, they were then first generation, but yeah. So we were being conservative here. So we screened the FGAs out. We've ended up with 360 participants. So that's the group that we're now looking at. So how are they distributed amongst the groups? Not all the groups are listed for the reasons I've said. I mean, we've only got 9 Moonies, ex-Moonies, I should say. But the 3 key groups are the Exclusive Brethren, the Jehovah's Witnesses, and the Mormons, because the sample sizes for those 3 groups are large enough for us to do comparisons with. So let me just make sure you've understood this table. 89 of the ex-Exclusive Brethren reported child sexual abuse. That's 41% of the total sample, which is 216. So we have 216 former members of the Brethren in the total sample of whom 41% are reporting child sexual abuse. All right, and that's the same with all the others. So the percentages are all fairly high. Moonies we can't really focus on much because there's only 9 of them anyway. Right. These are the 8 acts that I referred to earlier that we listed and asked people, have you ever experienced these acts? So obviously people were responding more than once, if you see what I mean. Some people claimed that reported that all 8, they've experienced all 8 of those acts. Yeah? And look at the percentages. I mean, you know, you look at that and you think this abuse is systemic. This is not something small and minor to sort of think, oh, well, never mind. But who were the perpetrators? We know they're members of the group, but who were they actually? And here we have, oh, and I've used colours, I'd forgotten I'd done this. The one group, the neighbours and friends of parents, 21% say their perpetrator was a neighbour or a friend of parents. If you group the leaders together, 19% were abused by leaders. But then you add in other members of the cultic group, 43%. Now, obviously, the relatives down here are also members of the group, so they may have endorsed that one as well. So, but if you look at the relatives, that is the highest percentage. And I can't remember what it is. Add it up quickly, someone for me. Oh, 53%, that was it, yes. But you see that the professionals, it's very low. So, hallelujah. No, we don't say that because even 1% of a professional is 1% too many. How old were these children when they were abused? Were they little children or not? We gave them a range. And if you add the 10 years and under, we have 63% were abused as little children. That statistic for me is very difficult to read and to hear. Although very early on in our analysis, we did decide to look at those 3 groups I highlighted a moment ago. So the exclusive brethren, Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons. And this is when I realized something strange is going on. If you look at the exclusive brethren, 42% of these victims were 10 years or under. More were over the age of 10. But then look at the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons. The trend is reversed. And I don't know how many in this room know about chi-square and probability, but a probability of less than 0.001 means that the probability of the chance of getting these results just by some random method, right? Like when you throw a dice, that's random. This is not random. That's what that probability means. So there's something going on here that we need to go back to. How much older was the perpetrator? Remember the WHO definition that said he doesn't have to be, or she doesn't have to be 5 years or older. They can be the same age. If we had followed the definition that said the perpetrator has to be 5 years or older, we would not have picked up that 36% of children who were actually abused by people the same age or a little bit older. Which I find quite shocking in a way. Let's look at the 3 groups again. Look at the numbers. Same thing happens. In the brethren, the perpetrators, more of them are less than 5 years older than the child that they're abusing. Whereas the other 2 groups, it's the other way around. And once again, this finding is highly significant. There's a lot of work for us to do yet. Try and work out why that was. This is not particularly remarkable because we had twice as many women as men in the sample. So you would expect more male perpetrators, but I don't know what the figures are for male versus female perpetrators, but anecdotally, we know that there are more male than female, right? How long did it happen? How long, over what period of time did it happen? So was it just a one-off? Or did it occur over all these different time frames? For 43% of the sample, the child's sexual abuse, so these two, went on for a year or more. So we're not talking about something that happened one day and then never happened again, are we? We're talking about something that is really systemic in these groups. And if you take 6 months or more, that goes up to 52%. The figures are actually quite shocking. We cluster those a bit and look again at our three groups. This time, there are no differences, but it may be something about the way I've clustered the time periods, right? Those small differences you can see are not significantly different. But, you know, this is preliminary work. We may find something later on. We then asked, which of the following is the main reason? Now, obviously, there are several reasons, but why did that person experience it? And the highest one is this one. Another person used his or her authority, 31%. But these are all about threats, aren't they? These ones down the bottom here, the Ethical Approval Committee were kind of a little, really? But they let us leave it there. But, you know, just because you liked it doesn't make it right. And actually, I'm glancing at the data myself without properly analysing it. It looks like these three are mostly children who are above 10 years of age. So they're more sexually aware, right? Or maybe, anyway. Did they talk about the abuse at the time? Only 20% did. Did you ever seek professional help? Only 35% did. That's in line with findings elsewhere. Let's look at our groups. You notice something strange? Look at that. Only 7% of the exclusive brethren former members talked about it at the time, compared to 22 and 30% of the others. Again, this is highly significant. And again, we find differences among those that sought professional help. So what is going on? We wondered if it was something to do with the relationship that the brethren have with the group that might be different from the way the members of JWs or Mormons might have. So we took the trauma coerced attachment scale, which is a fairly new scale. It's only 2 or 3 years old. We developed it at Salford. And it measures the extent to which the person feels attached to their group. And feels obliged to be loyal to them. So we're asking here, are the brethren more traumatically attached to their group than the other? And just eyeballing those mean scores there, it looks like they are, because the higher the score, the more attached you are. And it was significant. Now, this was done with a Driscoll-Wallace, which it should say at the bottom, but it doesn't. And what that scale produces is this wonderful diagram. So you see the three groups, and the blue lines are the important ones. The numbers are the mean ranks for anybody that knows the Driscoll-Wallace. It's a non-parametric test. And this one shows that the former exclusive brethren participants are scoring significantly higher than the JWs and significantly higher than the Mormons. But the difference between the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses is not significant. So there's no real difference between those two. It's the brethren that are standing out as different. Well, at time's passing. I found out at the time if anyone did, which is similar to the previous question, but we're trying to look at who it was that they talked to. And you can see that it's the parents and another member of the group, if they talked at all, not to the police, not the doctors, not the therapists, not the teachers, which kind of underlines that mistrust of external agencies, doesn't it? Oh, sorry. Yes. Have you tried to report this abuse as an adult? 17% said yes, but only 9%, in only 9% of cases, did that actually result in legal or disciplinary action. It's just such a sad story. The IICSA, so not the ISCA, came up with these 7 domains in which victims of child sexual abuse can be harmed. We're focusing on the emotional well-being. We may be able to can get into interpersonal relationships another time and religious and spiritual beliefs now. So we use the International Trauma Scale to assess PTSD and CPTSD. This yields 2 scores. One is that you've met the criteria or not, so it's categorical, yes or no. And the other is a kind of a score that adds all your responses up together. Okay? Hope that makes sense. And we found that of the sample that we have at the moment of 360, 59% met the diagnosis for PTSD and 76% met the diagnosis for complex PTSD. Okay, but then what's the percentage in the rest of our sample? Well, before I come to that, let's look at the groups again. And I'm quite surprised by this, that the exclusive brethren percentages are lower than the other 2. Don't really know why at the moment. The probabilities, the P is not as highly significant as before. And if we look at our clever diagram, oh, hang on. We go back, yes. Oh, this is the people that met the diagnosis. That's right. So, yeah. Okay, so they are slightly different, but it's not highly significant. But then if you look at the actual total score from the PTSD questionnaire, the brethren score seems to be lower than the other 2, isn't it? The total score. So this is also significant. The fact that the exclusive brethren participants are lower than the other 2 is significant. And if we look at that clever diagram, that clever triangle, you can actually see that the significance is only between the exclusive brethren and the Jehovah's Witnesses. So the Jehovah's Witnesses seem to be getting a much higher mean ranked score than the other 2, but the only significant one is the one with the exclusive brethren. So something needs to be done with that. We're kind of trying to work it out. Right, so then we created 2 groups. One was our child sexual abuse group. The other was the remainder of the total sample who were not first-generation adults. So we took them out on the grounds that they couldn't have experienced child sexual abuse in the group. I know there's a slight anomaly there somewhere. So we then looked at, sorry, this is really condensed because I needed 2 papers, not 1. We looked at the distribution of symptom checklist 90, which is quite a well-known scale for measure for distress, the interpersonal inventory of interpersonal problems, the Wessex dissociation scale, the PTSD score, and the DSO. The DSO is the complex PTSD score. They're all significantly higher in the child sexual abuse grouping. So clearly the child sexual abuse survivors are the people that are driving those scores up. They really have experienced a huge amount of distress. I personally feel that we need a working party on this, a global one that can look at the situation worldwide and be a force to make the change. And maybe ICSA can be behind that driving force. I don't mean the IICSA now, I'm talking about the Cultic studies. So I did create a summary. I think my time is over, but maybe I could leave that up there while we see if there are any questions. The summary doesn't mention the difference between the exclusive brethren and the other groups. because I'm still not quite sure what that's about. So we have a few minutes for discussion if anybody has questions.